on many, all over it, very sort of 5-storey apartment buildings, all completely just bombed, and then they left. So the locals couldn't find any rationale. It was like a punishment beating. They just came in, smashed up the buildings, particularly the buildings that were from the days of the Soviet Union, and then just disappeared. So that was just residential. There was panic. It's next to Bucha, where there was more extensive occupation and massacres. But all the reports from the east indicate that it's just a relentless destruction of villages and towns.
And how about the people that you met there? What's the morale like amongst civilians?
Well, the morale is high. I mean, they're anxious, but they're extremely...
They're determined people, are they not, the Ukrainians?
Yeah, but overwhelmingly, the people I spoke to, I met a guy called Dmitry at a convalescent home, who was the head of the Soviet army in Berlin in 1973. He's completely pro-Russian, pro-Soviet. And for him, he just said to me, I just don't understand what this is about. So there's been a huge switch of people who are more Russian speakers, more sympathetic to Russia, to the idea that there has to be, a sustained resistance to this aggression.
Thank you. Joe, hearing then people not really knowing what it's about, do you feel like you have a better grasp of what this is about now, nearly 100 days on, than we did at the beginning?
Yes, I think we all do. And I think one of the challenges is to keep it in the news. It's always a problem. Foreign news doesn't get the same coverage as domestic news, whether it's about Partygate or the Jubilee or whatever it is. And it's a challenge for media organisations to make, and to weigh up those decisions about how you keep it in the headlines. And all the time we're looking at Ukraine, of course. We're not thinking about Afghanistan or Syria or Yemen or Sudan or any other places around the world where there is, terrible devastation wrought by war. But I think, certainly from my point of view, I didn't realise, to my great shame, that Ukraine was so beautiful before this. I didn't know that it had got this wonderful architectural and cultural heritage. So, the awful irony of that is so much of it, as Maurice has just said, is being destroyed. But I think, the reality is this is going to go on for a long time, Bev. I mean, I don't see, unless something changes in the Kremlin, or unless there is a breakthrough somehow diplomatically, I don't see that this is going to be anything other than a very long war. And as Maurice was just saying, that we can see that the Russians are beginning to, they're not making the advances as quickly as they thought, but they are moving. And we know there are reports of they're already issuing Russian passports into the parts of the country that they occupy. They're forcing the teachers to teach the Russian curriculum, that sort of thing. And meanwhile, we've got, as you said earlier, America sending missiles to help, which, of course, Putin says that's a declaration of war. So it's, there's an awful lot that affects all of us. It's not an isolated incident.
Peter, I totally agree with what Joe is saying. The challenge, to some extent, is to make this feel relevant and pertinent to the British public. We are GBNews, and we'd like to, focus on predominantly UK GB-based issues. However, our viewers care about what's happening. They care about the civilians that are being harmed, and the civilian lifestyle, the buildings, the schools, the hospitals, all of the devastation. What's your take on the last almost 100 days? Because I think a lot of people watching this didn't really understand much about Ukraine or the complicated history at the start of it. What has changed for you? Because you already knew rather a lot about that region.
Well, what changed for me was the stupidity of the Russian action, which put them wholly in the wrong in an issue in which that was not really entirely the case before. This war began in 2014.
Yeah.
It began with a violent mob putsch against the legitimate president of Ukraine, which was openly backed by foreign powers. And that was the first violence. It was when the first shots were fired. It was when the first police officers were killed. And it triggered what then happened in the Don Basin and in the Crimea. And there has been a war in Ukraine in which very few people have been interested since 2014, particularly in the Don Basin, where an awful lot of civilians have died, both Russians and Ukrainians. and in which the Ukrainian army has behaved pretty much as badly as the Russian army has behaved. And we have this ridiculous one-sided view of it. People who only realised there was a war in Ukraine 100 days ago may need to do some catching up. So I'm not interested in taking sides in this. I've seen war. I've seen corpses. I don't want to see any more. I think that this war should be brought to an end. I do not think that sending more and more advanced artillery and long-range rocket systems is going to bring it to an end. I think it's going to sustain it. And I think that more and more voices should be raised saying it is time that we found a compromise. A compromise was available before this stage of the war began. It's known as the Minsk II agreement. It did not involve Ukraine ceding any territory to Russia. It involved more autonomy for the Russian-speaking areas. And it should be revived, and it should be revived very quickly. Because the longer it's not revived, the more corpses there will be, the more ruined homes there will be, the more refugees there will be, and the more irreversible pain and grief there will be.
But do you think in giving that region effectively to Putin and to handing that over to Russian leadership, is that enough at this stage?
That's not what was proposed in Minsk II. What's proposed in Minsk II was that Ukraine would recognise the fact that it has a substantial minority which tends towards Russian-speaking and Russian culture, which needs, just as the Swiss Germans and the Swiss Italians and the Swiss French need to have some sort of autonomy to govern themselves. And the idea of Minsk II was to arrange Ukraine so that it would become a more federal country.
I see.
And that it was nothing to do with handing territory over.
But in that initial speech on the eve...
I'm not suggesting.
But on the eve of invasion, when Putin made that initial monologue, that incredibly, almost sentimental monologue, in which he talked about the history of Russia and the fact that the Donbass region should never have been given up to Ukraine, and that was always Russia. I keep going back to what he'd talked about as his initial aim.
Yeah. But doesn't mean he has to get his aim, does it?
No, absolutely.
The whole point, what's been established here is that Russia is not the military power which many people claimed that it was beforehand, or even the military power which it thought it was. It's been fought, if not to a standstill, and it's been severely slowed down. This has now become a very slow-moving war in which small areas of city and country are chewed up by artillery. Very large numbers of people die, and many, many people are forced from their homes. But it's not a rapid war of movement and conquest. And that's not, I don't think, available to the Russians or indeed to anybody else. So what we have to say is, here is a war which is causing nothing but damage, pain and harm, which ought to be resolved. There is a possible peace available. It should be pursued. I see no sign.
Yeah.
In the United States, I see no sign in the United Nations of anybody doing it.
It's making a lot of money, Peter, for the military-industrial complex. It's making a lot of money.
I have to believe that the world is not that cynical, that people are not actually openly going to say we're prepared to allow more people to die and be driven from their homes for the making of money. No government can operate on that principle. So the United States government and the Russian government and the governments of the major countries of Europe should be putting immense pressure on everybody involved to come to the negotiating table with serious proposals for a peace.
But won't it come down to economics in the end? I mean, we've seen Europe broadly get to an agreement. They've managed to work out a deal with Hungary over gas and oil supplies. We heard Polly saying in the news, 10 weeks of grain for the world.
Yeah.
That's nothing. That's like, the bottom of the cornflake packet.
That's right. And and the grain and the wheat for us may be not so much, cheap pasta on the shelves, but for some Middle Eastern countries,
absolutely,
going to be
But these are other reasons to be seeking a peace agreement.
Exactly.
It's ridiculous that most of the major European countries are suffering quite badly from the sanctions against Russia. We don't actually know how badly Russia is suffering from these things, and I very much doubt myself whether Russia is going to give up fighting in Ukraine because of sanctions.
Yeah.
So again, there is very good rational reason to be seeking peace.
So Maurice, why does it feel that there isn't the impetus to seek peace?
Because there's no desire for it as it stands, and particularly, just to disagree with Peter on the Russian side, it's more like a punishment beating that is being meted out here. It's got nothing to do with economics. It's really, as you said in that Putin speech, just before, it's more like a sense of betrayal that Ukraine hasn't been faithful to the eternal union with Russia. and that it's going to block its access to the Black Sea so it can't earn a living. It's going to burn down its home. It's going to, I mean, there is an element of vengeful fury going on. And Minsk, I was completely supportive of that, Peter, during that process. But right now, what I'm hearing, just two things that I heard eyewitness accounts of. The first is the Ukrainians were saying to me that there's been a deportation of more than 1 million people from the Donbass area into Russia, a forced deportation with filtration centres. I mean, so that's a huge act, if you like, of ethnic cleansing. The second is in Kherson province and in the areas of the Don Basin that they've conquered, they're already issuing Russian passports and working in rubles. So there's an element here where the compromise of a federal Ukraine within the Minsk II framework is already gone.
Right.
Well, I'm not going to enter into arguments about the accuracy or otherwise of those. Some of them may be true, some of them may not be true. But whatever you say, the longer this war goes on, the more things of that kind will take place. And the deeper you get into the conflict, the harder it is to get peace. We have experience in this continent of digging ourselves into immovable positions. It happened in 1914, a war which all the participants thought would be over in a matter of months, went on for 4 appalling years because people were too proud and too afraid of public opinion in some cases to actually say, let's have a negotiated peace as has always been done before. In this case, I think, I'm not sure it's pride or something else. I believe that the Russian action is more or less the action of a protection racketeer. We're smashing the place up because we're sick of the way you've been behaving, and we're smashing it up. I've always thought the idea that Russia had some plan to conquer and occupy and take over Ukraine was fatuous. I don't think they've got the strength to do it, but as a straightforward protection racket, as you say, punishment beating, I think it makes sense. But they've done that now.
I don't think it's over. That's what I mean. I think there's a bit more.
The thing is, it's not going to be over if the United States spends billions and billions and billions of dollars in sending more arms in. You do not pour petrol onto a fire if you want it to go out.
I'm going to bring in some of your comments. You've been getting in touch with us on Twitter. Thank you. And on email, John has said this is about Russia protecting its borders from NATO's entrenchment, using Ukraine as a vehicle to place their weapons. I speak to Ukrainians every day. Many of them don't agree with what the West is doing by arming Ukraine, who will without doubt fail to win this war. And Trevor has said, Peter, well done for telling the whole story. It's not, as you say, the one-sided story I was aware of at previous 2014 events, and the majority of the British public aren't. That's true. I think we see these Ukrainian people who effectively look like Westerners dressed in Marks and Spencer's clothes, and we presume they were all sleeping soundly in their beds, and suddenly the bombs started dropping, and particularly, as you say, for the east of the country, that hadn't been like that
8 years of hell.
For 8 years. So I'm just thinking, if what John is saying here, John has actually said, I was in the Crimea back in 2002, and even then the tension between Ukrainians and Russians was obvious. Many Russians were not happy being part of the Soviet Union. My answer to them was to go and live in Russia, but that was unacceptable to them, to give up the life they had, and they should become part of Russia. Maurice, did you feel on your trip there recently that there is any light at the end of the tunnel, or will we be sat here in 100 days having this same conversation?
Yeah, I didn't see any conceivable. I mean, there has been no movement towards any peace initiative, almost in complete absence of the UN. I think that the blockade on the Black Sea is going to intensify the food crisis. I think the impoverishment will increase. As far as the Ukrainians I spoke to were concerned, they've just been invaded, and they need to resist that invasion. So they're resolute in every meeting I had in calling for the ability to at least counter the Russian weaponry.
But Maurice, isn't part of the problem, isn't part of the reason why there is no movement towards peace, the fact that Western public opinion is still very much in love with the idea that this is like the Lord of the Rings, that Ukraine is Gandalf and the Shire versus the Russian orcs. And it simply isn't that simple. It never has been that simple. And if any, I'm not quite sure what Britain's interests are in supporting American policy in that part of the world. And I've never had it explained to me. But it seems to be the interests of any humanitarian person in any country have to be to put an end to a war, if it can be put an end to, as quickly as possible. And I think public opinion really ought to be coming round to the idea that we shouldn't be so gung-ho about this, imagining that it's glory to the Ukraine and everything will be fine. People die horribly all the time.
But I think
innocent,
that is part
totally
of the media problem, isn't it?
Well,
It is,
but here we are. This is what can we affect sitting here in this studio?
But you're right, because
the media problem.
Boris Johnson said at the start of the war this will be Ukraine's finest hour.
Yeah, well,
maybe it is, but it's not very nice to be involved in if you're Ukrainian, actually.
OK, right, thanks all for kicking us off. OK, the Archbishop of Canterbury waded into controversy today with clips of an interview in which he appeared to say Prince Andrew should be forgiven as he's trying to make amends. The Archbishop says we should be a more forgiving society. Is he right? See you in 3.
Coming up on Dan Wootton tonight, will Sturgeon's holier-than-thou attitude and entitlement be her undoing and sink her independence dream? The new chairman of the Scottish Tories, Craig Hoy, is taking a stand for ordinary Scots who don't buy into the First Minister's cult of personality. He'll join me live. Plus, former Margaret Thatcher aide and Conservative commentator Niall Gardner is with me for expert analysis ahead of the Diamond Jubilee. And there's unfiltered opinion from US superstar journalist Megyn Kelly, columnist extraordinaire Rod Liddle, and my superstar panel, the media personality Christine Hamilton, the entrepreneur and activist Adam Brooks, and the broadcaster Ashley James. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Join us for a special GB News event.
The celebration of the Queen's Platinum Jubilee.
From pageantry here at the Palace
To the parties in your street.
We'll bring you 4 days of
Unforgettable moments.
this bank holiday weekend.
Join us live up and down the country as we share your memories
Of Her Majesty's extraordinary reign.
Send us your stories, photographs and videos.
at jubilee@gbnews.uk.
Come and celebrate with us.
On GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co. with me, Bev Turner, sitting in for Michelle. Your panel tonight, columnist from the Mail on Sunday, Peter Hitchens, Labour peer Maurice Glassman, and political commentator Joe Phillips. It feels appropriate now to have this debate on the eve of a long family weekend in which you might be forced to see people you don't want to. I'm kidding. But do you feel a bit like me that regardless of whether you were pro or anti-mandates and lockdowns, the last 2 years have caused unprecedented divisions within families and friends. And in this regard, the royals are no different to us mere mortals. When they gather for the Jubilee this weekend, won't we all be looking for signs of forgiveness or simmering resentment? The Archbishop of Canterbury has waded into this and said we all need to be more forgiving as a society. And as for Prince Andrew, the Archbishop says the Prince is seeking to make amends.
Now, with Prince Andrew, I think we all have to step back a bit. He's seeking to make amends, and I think that's a very good thing.
So the Archbishop has since made it clear that he wasn't specifically talking about forgiving Prince Andrew, but should we forgive? Peter Hitchens, I'm very excited to hear what you've got to say about this, because it's been a tough couple of years for people who have been questioning lockdowns and vaccine mandates and all of the impositions on our civil liberties. Are you finding it easy to forgive the government, or is that letting them off the hook too easily?
I don't believe in forgiving anybody who isn't sorry. And who doesn't show that they're sorry in an absolutely clear way. I have biblical warrant for this, Mark 17, 3-4, which is quite clear that you have to repent before you're forgiven. And this ridiculous idea, which has grown up in the churches in recent years, you just go out forgiving everybody, whether they've done things to you or done things to everybody else, or whatever. You can't do it.
No.
Forgiveness is personal between the person who's been offended and the person who's done the offending. And the person who's done the offending has to be sorry.
Well, by that reckoning...
And the government are not sorry.
No.
I will say one personal thing. For me, no, I'm one of the luckiest people alive. I've got no complaints about my own life. But the destruction of the university education of one of my children in the past couple of years is something I can't forgive, because no restitution can be given, and also because the people involved have shown no sign of shame or regret about burning down the house to get rid of a wasp nest, a ridiculous panic for which they imposed on us, and which was wholly unnecessary and which was stupid and wrong. No sign at all that they think it was wrong. So how can I forgive them?
So do you think that a lot of people are going to punish the Conservatives at the next election if they felt like we did, you and I did, about a lot of these...
Well, why would you punish the Conservatives if that benefited the Labour Party, who were even worse?
Yes,
they were saying,
a very good point.
burn the house down again and do something even more stupid. So what would be the point of you wouldn't punish... Anyway, you never punish... It's a fantasy to believe that you punish politicians by throwing them out of office. It's when they leave office that they start making the real money.
Well, that's very true, but that's what our democracy is.
It's not punishment at all.
Surely, what else do we have,
expect to be there long. They just make their names and then they go off on the circuit and make gazillions.
Oh, I can...
So that's not punishment.
Matt Hancock is going to be doing corporate speeches for those drug companies for the next 20 years. I've been saying that from the start.
Tickets will be selling out.
Oh, I don't know. They'll have to... They can pay him £1 million a corporate speech. He only has to do 2 a year.
It's unbelievable what they make.
It is incredible. So, Joe, you've spent a lot of time with politicians. Do you find it easy at the moment, looking back on the last 2 years, to see some of the damage they've done? Are you going to drown in the milk of human kindness when you consider Boris Johnson?
No, I loathe Boris Johnson with a passion. I think he's beyond an empty vessel. I think his only plan was to get himself into Downing Street. I think he's a disgrace to the office of Prime Minister. I think he's extremely damaging to British democracy and our reputation around the world. And I think, unfortunately, saying sorry is so easy, it becomes meaningless. So, I will not personally feel anything other than utter revulsion for Boris Johnson. But I do think the Archbishop has got a point, that I think we are very quick to get angry. We're very quick to take umbrage. We're very quick to want to blame somebody to get something back, whether it's financial recompense or, somebody to be punished. Sometimes, bad stuff happens. And sometimes it's the little stuff that doesn't need to become big stuff. And I just was researching a little bit before I came in, and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, he defined forgiveness as the capacity to make a new start. Now, to a certain extent, I agree with Peter. You can only forgive if somebody... It's not so much about them being sorry, it's about them recognising that they've done wrong. And this is the problem with Boris Johnson. He can say sorry till he's blue in the face, but he doesn't think he's done anything wrong. But I do think, as a society, we need to be a little bit kinder and a little bit less quick to anger.
Morris, kinder, less quick to anger, and more easily able to forgive in our hearts? Is this a problem with the human condition, that we are becoming more resentful?
Yeah, hateful is definitely part of it. I mean, there's a distinction to be made. I think, I'm sympathetic to the Archbishop. I mean, people don't need to be forgiven for having different views. I mean, there's this element that the idea that if you supported Brexit or you were post-lockdown, that was in some way sinful. So that's not forgiveness. But certainly the social media, Twitter culture, Peter, which you participate in, is relentlessly unforgiving and merciless in its tone. So that's one aspect. But the other aspect is that when, so if people make a mistake, I don't think the mistake needs to be forgiven. That people make mistakes, you can say sorry for that. But there is an aspect of what the Archbishop is getting at, is that when you have, to use religious language, sinned, when you have done something really egregious, then there has to be repentance and atonement. You can't forgive others unless there's a recognition that they've done wrong. And the intractable nature with the Ukraine story is that the possibility of Russia doing that is nil, and the possibility of Ukraine recognising actions that it's taken in the last 8 years is nil. So there's no basis there for the peace. Just to go back to a genuine peace has to be some kind of recognition.
But I think there's been so much emotion in the last 2 years. I mean, emotion was what drove so many of the debates, when a lot of us were just looking for facts rather than just feels. And particularly, I think, when it comes to the Partygate situation, looking at Number 10 and some of their behaviour, individuals who didn't say goodbye to their loved ones or had to do so on an iPad, or fathers that couldn't be at the birth of their children until the very last minute. I think individuals are carrying around a lot of
This is a misdirection.
anger.
This is a misdirection of anger. It wasn't the problem wasn't that people were holding parties while this was going on. The problem was that any government in a free country ever thought it was proper to tell people they couldn't visit their elderly relatives in their last days, or attend funerals, or have marriages. It was a completely and utterly unjustifiable, excessive use of state power by people who didn't know what they were doing. And when does a mistake turn into a misdeed? I believe that when the deliberate creation of fear by the state is not a mistake. These were people who were determined to carry on in this destructive way because they believed utterly they were right. They had no intention of listening to any criticism at all. And this is not just over the shutdown of the country. And again, we pay huge. The cost of living has gone up. And no connection is made. The cost of living has gone up because of the ridiculous inflationary policies adopted of pouring money down the drain, preventing people from working for 2 long years. Madness. And now we pay. This wasn't a mistake. It was an active misdeed. And a few people, and I have to say I was one of them, pointed this out from the start. It wasn't impossible for intelligent, informed people to see that it was wrong. So I'm not prepared to accept it as a mistake. I think it was a misdeed. And I think, therefore, that they do need to atone for it, and to be, frankly, the only thing, which is the same goes for Blair and Alistair Campbell. The only thing that they should do afterwards is to go and take vows in a Trappist monastery and never be heard of again. That's the only atonement I would accept from any of them. The idea that they now sit making vast sums of money and flying first class around the place in the case of Blair, endlessly touting himself as Mr. Wonderful, is an affront. And we've had far more inquiry, I might add, into the consumption of cake in Downing Street in the past few months than we ever had into who was really to blame for the wrongful war in Iraq or for the death of Dr. David Kelly.
But it's not about it. The problem with the Partygate thing is, and I know many of the viewers and listeners say, "Oh, it's trivial, move on." It's not about the cake and the half-wrapped sandwiches and the warm white wine. It's the lies. And it's that, and I think that's the point that Peter's making in a way. It's, mistakes and misdeeds. Lying is a misdeed, particularly if you know you're lying.
As opposed to a mistake.
To a mistake where you happen to be, in a place where somebody gave you a birthday cake.
But the lie was that they knew all these things were rubbish. They knew none of it worked, and they didn't apply it to themselves, but they applied it to other people.
Yeah.
Because if they really thought that all these stay 10 feet away from, wear a mask rubbish was true, they'd have done it themselves.
But then,
they didn't.
But that's why.
As soon as the cameras were off, they were off. They were off.
Dangerous for democracy.
Maurice, do you think that there are a lot of people this weekend who have had, I mean, family, even we're talking about it on a macro and a political level, but on a small level, there are lots of families actually that have been affected the last 2 years. You know, you were going to kill grandma, or you didn't take the necessary measures, or you shouldn't have been having a barbecue because you... All of the minutiae, the way that politics affected our lives in these tiny little ways, has caused so many kind of fractures within families and friendship.
And that came on the back of 2.5 to 3 years of real divisions over Brexit.
Yeah.
I mean, that was... and that, so there is a glory in our country which is being eroded, which is of civility.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm getting at, is the ability to love and be with others who disagree with you.
But what do those people do who feel so aggrieved in the last 2 years, who feel that the government's tentacles reached into the areas of our life which should never have had anything to do with them?
There's that group in the population, and there's another group in the population who feel that the government have blood on their hands for not going far enough.
Which is what I think.
Yeah. So, I mean,
That's right. There are both sides. I don't disagree at all.
But they're mistaken, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Yes, they can be mistaken. So this is what I'm.
The knowledge that we have shows it's not true.
This is what I'm getting at, Peter. I think at this level, if you say you're mistaken, that's fine. If you say that you're sinning egregiously, that doesn't make for a really comfortable life.
But it's absolutely right what Maurice says. I mean, we've had probably 5 years in total, maybe longer, of Brexit, which has divided people. And is dividing people still, because there will be some people who say, oh, you know, the reason we've got cost of living shortage of staff is because of Brexit. Let's not go down that. Now, we can all have, because we're grown-ups, intelligent, one would like to hope, well-informed people. But, you know, as Maurice said earlier, it's the social media and the quickness that people take offence and they won't listen and they don't want to engage and they don't want to say, OK, I don't agree with you, but let's have a drink and toast the Queen or whatever it is.
Well, let me go to some of the what you've been saying. Artemis on Twitter has said the Archbishop is wrong. We are responsible for stopping unacceptable and wrong behaviours. We need to keep talking about where the boundaries are and why they are there, which is a bit what you were saying, Joe. All of this is improved if we have actual open, honest and calm conversation. David says the Archbishop of Canterbury is irrelevant. He should stick to matters of faith and drop all the wokery. And Jeannie on Twitter, she's giving you a bit of a telling off here, Joe. She said the speech from Joe against Boris Johnson was appalling, and then she has the cheek to say we need to be kinder. Is it just kinder to everyone except Boris Johnson?
Yeah, pretty much.
Good,
all right, Julie.
Sums it up, doesn't it?
And Diane says, surely Andrew has to be found guilty of something before we have a need to forgive. He hasn't been charged with anything. That's very true. He only gave £12 million to Virginia Guthrie to not go to court. Right, coming up at 7, it is Nigel Farage. What's on the show tonight, Nigel?
Hi, Bev. Well, every day, you know, now it's Lord Geit, the ethics advisor. Will he resign? More letters going in. And the question I want to ask is, should Boris Johnson stay on as Conservative Party leader? Is it in the interests of the country and the party that he does? The Daily Mail say without him, they'll lose the next election. I say with him, they're bound to lose the next election. It's time for them to man up and, frankly, get rid of him. And that's our big debate tonight, starting at 7 o'clock.
Thank you, Nigel. OK, coming up, as we prepare to celebrate the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, are the Australians getting ready to ditch her? The new Aussie PM has appointed a Minister for the Republic. What extraordinary timing. More on that after the break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
On radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
we embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
every morning from 6 o'clock. We'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Coming up on The Mark Steyn Show, with Australia appointing an assistant minister for the Republic on Jubilee Week, we speak to The Spectator's Alex Marshall about the future of the monarchy. Vaccine injured Claire Hibbs is back to share with us an update on her search for justice and compensation. Plus, statman Jamie Jenkins is joining to shed some light on the numbers for us. All that and more on The Mark Steyn Show from 8 o'clock.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Bev Turner, sitting in for Michelle tonight. Your panel includes columnists from the Mail on Sunday, Peter Hutchins, Labour peer Maurice Glassman and political commentator Joe Phillips. It doesn't include them. That is your panel, I'm afraid. I have no one else. That's it. And me, I'm afraid. Keep your comments.
Afford the others.
You're expensive enough. Keep your comments coming in via email or on Twitter. Now, as we're all hanging out our bunting and going Jubilee crazy, Australia could be about to ditch the red, white and blue. New Labour Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has appointed a new assistant minister for the Republic. Here he is. Matt Thistlethwaite. Now, if he hasn't got Yorkshire ancestors, I don't know who has. Is he a few stubbies short of a six-pack or a bonzer bloke? And what about the timing? Couldn't he have waited until the bunting had come down? Joe, what do you think? This is a bit rude of the Australians, isn't it?
I don't, actually. I think it's probably the right time to have a conversation.
Do you?
Yeah, because, you know, there's going to be an awful lot of focus on the Platinum Jubilee.
Yeah, quite
There's going to be lots of stuff going on all around the world. And that's when people need to have it sort of thinking, well, you know, she's done a great job, but maybe it's time after she's gone. I mean, what are you going to do? Wait until she dies? Because that's not a good time to do it. It's much better, and they're only starting the conversation. And I think now is the right time to have that conversation. You know, they narrowly rejected becoming a Republican, I think it was 1999, but only because what they'd offered was that Australian MPs would choose who would be their head of state as opposed to the public. Now, you know, if you did that vote again, who knows? Well, I think it's a good thing to have a conversation.
You're right, because 1999, 55% of Australians voted against becoming a republic. This new Australian Prime Minister that we just saw a clip of before, and Joe and I for a minute thought it was Michael Gove when on the trail for Mark Steyn's show.
He hadn't got glasses on, to be fair.
He does look a bit like him. He obviously, he's the first Labour Prime Minister Australia have had in a while. And at the moment, there are 54 nations in the Commonwealth. The Queen is the head of state for 15 of them. 34 other members are already republics, and 5 others have their own monarchies. Barbados got rid of the Queen in October 2021 as their head of state, didn't they? William and Kate, Peter, went to the Caribbean in March of this year and got booed. So that's not looking good. The Prime Minister of Jamaica said that he wished his country to become a republic. What are Australia going to do? Because this new Prime Minister has said it would take it to a referendum to the public.
Well, the last referendum, the slogan which defeated the Republic was a lot of people on the Australian left saying no to this Republic. It wasn't no to any Republic. That was the slogan of the people who succeeded in defeating the Republic last time. They weren't saying they didn't want a republic at all. They were saying they didn't want the one where the
Right, I
president
see.
was chosen by MPs. I don't know, things may have changed. Australia isn't, in many ways, the way we think of it. There's an awful lot of new Australians who have no great affinity with Britain or with the monarchy, who may go one of two ways. I have a good friend of mine who's been observing and says that quite a lot of them may actually turn out to be monarchists. I don't know. But it seems perfectly reasonable, I agree with Joe, for it to be discussed now. The Queen herself has given permission to us to discuss what happens after she dies. She used that wonderful phrase, in the fullness of time. And I think that's a good thing because she understands that everybody understands that she will not be here forever and there will be a time afterwards. We need to think about it, in my view, very hard indeed. If you want to save the monarchy, which I would like to do, though I don't have much hope of it, you really do need to think very hard about the arguments you're going to advance.
Why do we still need it then, if you would
Well,
like?
in my view, it keeps the monarchy is crucial because it keeps politicians out of various areas of public life. They don't get to wear the uniform and the cocked hat. They don't ride in the state carriage. They're not commanders-in-chief of the armed
You just
forces.
have to think President Blair, President Johnson.
I have to say, again,
President anybody.
I totally agree. Again, I might not feel like this 2 years ago, but now, having seen the corruption and the power-hungry megalomaniacs kind of in politics, I quite like the fact that there's a queen there, Maurice, sort of, even if it's just sort of making us feel a bit better that somebody might hold them to account.
Absolutely so, and the glory of the monarchy is precisely this, that the politicians can't masquerade as heads of state. I mean, the tragedy in Russia was that in 1905 they didn't go from a constitutional monarchy. So it's always the case that gangsters then take on this huge appearance. In relation to Australia, though, I do want to make the point as a Labour man that because Labour governments can no longer act in sensible ways on the economy in relation to capitalism, they don't seem to be doing anything about worker democracy, about workers' rights. I'm here with two ex-industrial correspondents who've seen the relentless glory of capital and the relentless humiliation of Labour in this bargain. So they go for cultural issues because it's easy to do, and we see that in our country all the time. And so what this was an indication for me that the new Labour government in Australia is not serious in the slightest about economic reforms and will do the same form of cultural politics that we've seen on the progressive left for a while.
Well, that is true of almost all.
But I think it's not going to
parties.
happen immediately. I mean, they're just starting the conversation.
Well, he's only a junior minister. It's not as if
exactly.
he's put a cabinet minister in charge of the Republican. It is obviously a gesture to a strong Republican wing.
It's also, isn't it? I mean,
Labour.
can you imagine that, like, the admin hassle that they're going to be faced with? I kind of made me thought about, it's a bit like women who don't bother getting divorced because they can't deal with the paperwork for a long time, because they're going to have to change all their currency, get the Queen's face off all of their currency, which, frankly, if we're moving towards a cashless digital society, that might be another way of pushing that kind of substantial, significant social change over the line. What about their flag? They'd have to change their flag. I mean, I know that's not a big deal.
Not necessarily, but if people want to do these things, they want to do it. People sometimes like to have revolutions. It becomes very hard to stop them. And the difficulty is that if it does happen in Australia, then how long before it bounces back to this country? If it happens in Australia, if it happens, which I used to think was impossible in New Zealand, and even in Canada now, I think it's not entirely.
But don't you think
then it
it will
comes
bounce
back here. So we need to worry very much, those of us who support the monarchy here, about whether it will happen there. And we need to take a very close interest in how the fight is fought and how the arguments are set out. Because it will be... I think people haven't even begun to understand how things will change once the Queen is gone. There will be huge convulsion in this country when it happens. It's been so long, and her personal standing is so great.
Yeah.
That it will be a new era in which all kinds of things will become sayable and doable, which weren't before. I'm very worried about it. I have a great sense of foreboding about it. But it's look and see what happens in Australia and New Zealand and Canada, because it could give you a good guide to how best to save it.
It's a very good point. Do you feel the same way, Jo? Do you worry about what will happen?
And I wouldn't say it keeps you awake at night, but I do think that, you know, certainly all of us sitting here, it would appear, have enormous respect for the Queen. And I'm not a monarchist, but I do think the Queen has been amazing. You know, I think they have done the right thing in beginning to slim it down, to get rid of the hangers-on. You know, there are Princess Anne's kids go off and do their own thing. They don't have titles. I think, you know, the tour that you mentioned of the Caribbean with Edward and Sophie and Charles and No, it wasn't Charles. It was William and
It was
Catherine.
William and Kate, yeah.
I mean, that was just so badly thought out.
Yeah, it was.
And actually, it's the people who are behind the scenes who need to think about how you have a modern monarchy in order to do the things that Peter's just said, but not to alienate people who think this is just, you know, silly frocks and tiaras.
Yeah. I want to see the result of our Twitter poll we asked you to take part in. This was about whether we should be forgiving. Is the Archbishop of Canterbury right when he says we need to become a more forgiving society?
Well, there's a surprise.
70% of you say no, we're sufficiently forgiving, thank you very much, and only 30% of you think that we need to become more forgiving. So there we go, we're a hard-hearted bunch.
There's no shame in being in a minority.
There's no
Someone
shame.
who's in a minority the whole time.
And, but, you know, it also shows how much disgruntlement there still is in the country.
Too much disgruntlement. Let's have 4 days of no gruntle.
We're going to have 4 days of no gruntle, says Joe Phillips, so I think that's quite sensible. What are you doing this weekend, guys? Big plans, big parties?
Working.
Working. Peter Hitchens, are you going to eat some cake and drink some champagne?
I might drink some champagne, but I won't be eating cake. I'm off cake at the moment.
OK, Joe?
I shall be going tomorrow night to watch the beacon being lit on the seashore where I live.
Oh, lovely. And Maurice?
Sleeping.
Sleeping? Yeah. Oh, OK, there we go. All right. I was looking for a slightly more jolly panel to talk about.
Have you got something to tell us?
No, well, yes, I'm going to be... I'm actually working tomorrow morning as well, but then I'm spending the weekend with my family, and then I'm going to be on GB News on Sunday afternoon with Alistair Stewart to do some of the Jubilee coverage from a wonderful gathering near Wolverhampton in the huge park. It's going to be great fun. Make sure you join us. Thank you very much to my panel, Peter Hitchens, Maurice Glassman, Joe Phillips. If you missed any of today's show, you want to catch up on previous episodes, download the Dewbs & Co podcast. It's available on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts from. I will see you on Sunday, but right now, here is the very important weather.
Hello, Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. A fine day to come for the first of the bank holidays. For the vast majority, it's going to be dry and bright. Yes, a bit chilly first thing, but plenty of warm sunshine by the afternoon. The main exception will be Northern Ireland. This set of weather fronts just drifting in. It will bring more cloud here and a little bit of rain. But for most, we're under the influence of high pressure. Not many isobars on the chart, which means the winds are light, which means it is turning quite fresh out there. Temperatures falling, and it's also likely to turn a little misty. Even some fog patches possible over parts of eastern England through the early hours. Temperatures are tumbling. It is going to be a chilly start to Bank Holiday Thursday, well down into single figures. A touch of frost isn't completely impossible through the glens of Scotland. It will be a fine start, though, for most. Any morning mist and fog will clear very rapidly after dawn, and then plenty of sunshine for England, Wales, Scotland. Maybe 1 or 2 scattered showers across Scotland and Northern England. And there's that weather front coming in, introducing more cloud for Northern Ireland and eventually some outbreaks of rain, although it may not get to Belfast till late in the day. Temperatures responding to that sunshine after a chilly start, much warmer than most of this week, into the low 20s across the south. It will feel cooler as that cloud and rain comes into Northern Ireland, and that's going to get more extensive through the evening and perhaps throw some showery rain into southwest Scotland, parts of northwest England as we head into Friday. Then Friday is a messy day, certainly in the west more cloud than Thursday, some showers for Wales, northwest England and Northern Ireland, maybe southwest England too. But again, for many central and eastern parts, and much of Scotland, most of the day will be dry and bright with some sunshine and again, quite a bit warmer than much of this week. Temperatures into the low 20s. A little cooler on Friday on some of those North Sea coasts, a bit more of a breeze picking up here. Things get complicated for